Good evening and welcome to another Spotlight Indie Chat. I am HL Tinsley. I will be hosting tonight because our usual host, Alex S. Bradshaw, has rudely decided to go on holiday. I can't really criticise too much because, fun fact, I actually started my holiday today. I am on my yearly break from work, so I will be having a full month off. Now, that's not just a flex, that is actually pertinent to the conversation that we'll be having tonight, and I will explain why in a moment. But before I do, I've invited some friends of the channel along to join me in this conversation, so I would like to get them all to quickly introduce themselves. If we could start with Patrick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Patrick Samphire. I largely write fantasy, although a little bit of science fiction, and in the past I've written books for children as well.
Perfect. And regular face, both on our channel and on our website, Phil Parker. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. Phil Parker, and as it says in the label there, I'm actually a fantasy author, which is great because I hadn't realised until I saw that that's actually what I am. It's good for a bit of identity, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to remind yourself of these things, Phil.
Yeah.
Particularly at your age, Phil.
I didn't want to forget.
I wasn't going to go.
We know where we are.
And Phil, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So I'm Phil Williams. I'm also a fantasy author, surprisingly, and I write dark fantasy.
It doesn't say so.
Contemporary. Doesn't say so. I don't remember it often, to be honest. You've got a good tactic there, Phil.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, I've recently started my summer holidays for the year. And the reason I brought this up is because during the month off that I now have, I have been working on book 3 of the Vanguard series. Book 3 has been something of a mountain to climb, and it has been 4 years since I started writing it. So I think we can all agree that's a bit of a writing slump, something that, most people suffer from. So I have challenged myself to finish the draft that I'm currently working on during the 30 days that I am off this summer. Not only this, I have been putting myself up for public accountability by sharing this journey on the Spotlight YouTube channel and through our social media on our Instagram. So you may have seen posts about it. And the reason I've invited our lovely friends here tonight is to talk about writing slumps and how you can manage them, get through them, what techniques you can use to help yourself get out of them, because I refuse to believe that I am the only person in the world that has been through or is going through this. So let's talk through some advice that we can give people. And I'd like to start by asking all of you, what part of writing a book do you personally find the hardest, or writing a series? So is it the starting the book? Is it the end point? Or do you find kind of the middle point is where you encounter some issues? Or maybe you have no issues. I don't know. Let's start with Patrick. Where do you fall?
Generally the most difficult bits, the beginning, the middle, and sometimes the end. No. I think there's always, there are kind of different types of barriers, aren't there? There's when you're starting a book, then you're trying to build something out of basically nothing, and that's a challenge by itself, but it's a creative challenge. I think when it comes to the middle of the book, what you're hitting is really something that is going on for a very long time, and you've been doing it for a long time. There's still a long way to go to the end, and it can become a bit of a day job. It's something that you're pushing yourself through, and you don't feel that you're necessarily getting closer to the end. For myself, honestly, the ends are the quicker bits, because once I've got past the first 2/3 and I can see the end in sight, then I do tend to speed up, and I write that quite quickly. So yeah, I think for me the slump is very much the drudge of kind of going through what is a very, very long project.
Yeah, it sort of has that feel of like the roller coaster where you spend ages just so slowly chugging up the hill, and then you get to the top and you have the kind of moment of overhang, and then you plummet to the. That's how writing feels to me, anyway. I don't know, Mr. Parker, would you agree?
No, actually, I think for me, the start is the book that I'm currently working on is a really good example of this, and I'm speaking having written two series where I found exactly the same thing happened on both occasions. It was the ending that proved to be the problem, and every time I start writing a book, the beginning of it is always ultra clear with me, and it seems to sort of inspire me, and I get pounding away on the typewriter and on the keyboard, and it all goes really well. Gradually the other ideas start to arrive, and it's that point just before you hit the climax where all the ideas go. They just vanish, and it's like, I have no idea how I'm going to get anything exciting happen. I know, let's all just say that they gather out in a circle and they all say, well, let's be friends. There's nothing wrong with friendship. And that's what happens. And they have a cup of tea and everybody goes home. And somehow those kind of books don't sell. I don't know why. That's where my slump is. It's just before the climax starts. And then once I've got that, then then that's fine. But it's reaching that point, and it's not. That's where I am at the present moment. So the slump that we're talking about, I've been sat in that slump now for 3 weeks. Getting of it.
4 years, Phil. 4 years.
Show off, aren't you?
No, I think it's interesting. You talk about kind of that. What I would almost call like the pre-match before, the big epic, whether it's going to be a fight scene or it's going to be a battle, whatever it's going to be. I think because we naturally tend to write towards whether it's an end point or whether it's just a particular story beat, I think sometimes those slumps do come in the traveling between one beat to another.
Yes.
Phil, what about you, Phil? Where do you kind of find the struggles?
Yeah, I mean, I'm famously just downhill all the time, so it goes very quickly for me. I personally find when I get into a story, it always comes very quickly. But the challenges for me tend to come with what we're, I guess, going to talk about more later in that when I come back to a story. So when writing sequels, when writing later down, I find it gets harder as you go along. Tying things together because they've suddenly got constraints. I find when I'm writing a book on its own and it's the first book, you can do whatever you want, you can mix things up. When you've got constraints, it becomes very difficult. And I find weirdly, probably not just with sequels, but it's on some books, it varies depending on books. Some books I know exactly what I'm doing, some books I kind of freeform a bit. And I often find strategy to complete the trilogy here. It's often the beginnings that I spend the most time on. And weirdly, it's often the first 7 chapters. And it doesn't matter how long the chapters are or how long the book is. There's always this kind of 7-chapter period at the beginning where I'm just trying to get everything right to start with. And once it's started, I can tend to go. But even once I've finished, I will tend to go back to those first chapters and spend the most time on the opening chapters because it's just kind of setting things up that I find quite challenging to, not so much that I find it hard to do or that it's not enjoyable for me, but I just find it's the bit that I want to get most accurate because it sets up everything else later. To some extent, I get that at the end as well. Often if I've got a very convoluted story, as they often do become, it's getting those sort of 1 or 2 chapters at the end where you have 1 or 2 key moments or conversations where everything comes together, and you've got to get that just right as well because you're kind of, I need to make this all make sense. It makes sense to me, but I need to make it make sense in a way that doesn't just freak people out. Yeah. So yeah, it's those kind of bits that I find most challenging. It's basically getting all the information at the beginning and the information at the end in an accessible way, I suppose.
Yeah, so I mean, really, what we've gathered from this is that the beginning bit is really difficult, the middle bit is really difficult, and the end bit is really difficult.
Yeah. I feel like we've got a good range there.
Yeah.
I wonder if part of it just comes down to what kind of writer you are, whether you're a fast writer or a slow writer. I think if you're a slow writer, then the middle probably is a bit that feels like more of a drag. If you're someone who launches in without having really thought about it all the way through, then maybe the end is where you start to hit your problems. And if you like to plan it all out and get it, if you like to plan it all out, then most of your work's going in at the front. So, I can see. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see it being different depending on your style.
I think that's very, very true. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Like one of my books, I remember I was 2 chapters away from the end. It wasn't a series, it was just a standalone book. 2 chapters away from the end, and I suddenly realized that it wasn't working and dumped it. Well, not dumped it, but reworked it considerably. Just because, don't you, that there's something really wrong here, and there's no good just pushing on. You've got to basically, restart something and then see where it goes. But yeah, I agree with Patrick completely.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, it was one of the things I was going to probably jump onto is because Phil also mentioned, free form, and people talk a lot about being, a plotter, a pantser, or whatever you might be in terms of your writing style. So, in terms of your writing style, whether you are someone who plots a lot, do you find that it helps or hinders to know in advance what you want the story to be? Because I know lots of writers who will plot out the entire story, all the beats, all the arcs, all the character development, and they will stick to it religiously. However, I plan all these things, and as Patrick rightly said, spent several months front loading the story. I have used none of it. So do we think that it helps or that it hinders to have that level of planning?
Oh, can I go first and say that definitely I have tried that. I have spoken to several people who have recommended books to me, that I read, and I've really tried to work that way. I really can't. For me, writing is an exploration. It is about not knowing where you're going. It's about sort of setting off without a map or without Google Maps, and you've got no idea where you're going, other than the fact that for me, I'm exploring the central characters and what's going to happen to them, their interaction with one another, and the fact that at some point I want the main characters to undergo some sort of transformative change, some form of redemption or something like that. And I've no idea how we're going to get there, but we need to get there. That's the destination. So it's an act of exploration. I consider myself the Christopher Columbus of writing.
No, I like that analogy. I will use that one in the future.
Give me 3 ships and I'm away.
Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's, again, like Patrick said, it's one of these ones which is going to depend hugely on the person. I think everyone approaches writing in different ways. But for me personally, and again, with different books, I've done it different ways. Sometimes I have written books where I've gone in with no idea, just a couple of characters I wanted to see performing and let them go. And sometimes I've planned things out and known exactly where a story was going. And I haven't found one way or the other is better or worse. It depends on what the book needs, I find. But in general, the way I tend to work is I always like to have an idea of the destination, or at least a scene or two somewhere along the way that I really want to get to. So I find that kind of encourages me, it gives me momentum moving towards that point of the story. And otherwise, what I will tend to do is I do a lot of planning and sort of brainstorming ideas just to sort of get them down, because I find that quite inspirational. It helps me to engage with the story, but then I will go into writing and just make it up as I go along and disregard the plan. And what often I find happens, which is even weirder or I guess more annoying, is I will get to the end, there will be problems. I will go back and edit very thoroughly, and it takes me ages. And eventually I realize I've come back to what I planned. If I'd stuck to the plan in the first place, it might have just saved me a lot of time. But the way I actually write, I tend to, as I say, I think it's going to be very unique, I think, however anyone engages with writing. For me personally, I treat it comes out to me a bit like rehearsing a play. I'm thinking of my story all the time in my head, and I'm rewriting the scenes in my head. I'm kind of imagining them happening. And when I get to the writing, it's a bit like performing it. You don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I've got an idea of how it should do, and it can surprise you still. So,
yeah. Patrick, what are your thoughts on planning and plotting and using that to kind of help you get through slumps and things?
Yeah, I mean, like Phil said, each book is different, and I will generally write each one in a slightly different way with a slightly different amount of planning. I have become increasingly an exploratory writer as I've gone on. I used to plan out more of it. I did try at one stage being a really, really well plotted writer and having spreadsheets of everything that was happening with all the characters and different scenes and right from the beginning. And it was a disaster. It was one of the worst books I had written. It took me so much time to revise it into something worthwhile. But I don't go into a book knowing nothing. I tend to have developed a few. It's this kind of the mountain sticking out of the mist type of model of writing, where you can see a variety of mountain peaks. You don't know what's in between, but you are there are these scenes, these things that happen. And as I go along, I tend to scribble down little bits of what's going to happen, and I'll often stop and just start asking myself questions and writing down in the notebook what the hell is going on. What does he actually want? Why is he doing this? And all that kind of stuff as I try and recenter myself. But for me, I think, like I said, I'm becoming more exploratory, and I do think that's slower for me, honestly. But I also think it's better what I come up with. And I tend not to know exactly how a book will end, but I have a pretty good idea of the direction it's going to go in and what kind of end it'll be. So the exact way that the hero or whatever solves the problem at the end, I won't know till I get there or get very close to it, but I will know kind of what's going to be happening, if you see what I mean. I won't know the details, I won't know the exact solution, but I'll know that X has happened at the end.
Yeah.
And
so go on.
No, it's all right.
No, I was just going to say, I do really like that idea of stopping and recentering and asking questions. And that actually will be something that going forward from this, I think I will try and do in my own writing, because it's very rare that, because I write quite quickly generally, although this has been a slow process for me, I tend to write quickly. So I don't ever really give myself that opportunity to sit and ask questions about, okay, well, what is actually happening here? What's the purpose of this? What are they doing? What are they feeling? What are they looking at? But that actually leads me nicely into what I think may be a little bit of a controversial talking point, because I like to stir up controversy while Alex isn't here to stop me. But I find that a lot of the time when things go off piste or when books aren't quite going to plan, what a lot of writers tend to do is they tend to say, the characters did this. The characters went off on a tangent. Oh, they took me here. So what I'd like to ask all of you is, do you think that is a cop-out?
Interesting.
I'll go, and I said, for me, it would be a cop-out. Sometimes I will, if I don't know what a character's going to do, then I will spend time thinking about them as a person, what they are. I don't have stories where the character takes over or whatever. That's not how I work at all. I think if you're a very instinctual writer, it can feel that way. It can feel, particularly if you're one of these people who totally immerses yourself in the character and kind of lives through it, then I could see it would feel that way. But to me, I think, I don't want to speak for anyone who does that method, because I don't do that method and I don't know how it works for them. But to me, it would feel kind of like it's almost like taking the first answer that comes to you in a situation of what might happen. And to me, the first answer's often not that interesting. The first answer is often a cliche. And so I often need to spend more time thinking about it than go with that. And I would worry if I was channeling a character and feeling they were leading it. I'd be worried that I was just going from cliche to cliche. But like I said, I don't write that way, and people who do may have a completely different opinion on it.
I think that's a great way of looking at it, to be honest, because I think certainly I have written like that in the past, and it would have been much earlier in my career, I used to be able to write that way and just see where the story takes you. But these days I have a much stronger idea of what a story should be or what I want it to be. So if it's going somewhere that I didn't plan it to go, then something's generally gone wrong, rather than something's gone wrong with the idea for the story, really. And I think that's a great way of looking at it. It's like if you write something and it goes in a different direction to what you expect, and you can't control that, then it seems like you don't want to. It seems like you can always go back and change it. You don't have to say, "Oh, the character wanted to do that." You kind of have to do what works for the story. And the story can surprise you. I think that you can sometimes be having a problem with the story and think, actually it works much better this way, but that's not the character driving it, that's the circumstances, that's the convincing way to complete your story. And I think that's very different if you're doing that for a purpose than to just kind of go in a weird direction and kind of think, well, I'll just leave it because why not? Again, it will depend on the book, though. Not all books are written that way, and some books, are deliberately gonzo and want to be different. So if you want to have a bit more free-form ride, then maybe that's what you want to do.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Phil?
No. I've insulted you so much.
You've set me up. Do we have a little hat here that I can cop? That's me copping out on all the things that you said. So we've just established the kind of writer that I am, haven't we? So thanks.
I think just to jump in, Phil, I think it's very important. I think it's very important that we do clarify that there's nothing wrong with writing a story where you are, as Patrick has said, living that character experience and kind of, experiencing it through their eyes, feeling what they feel, and immersing yourself in that character. I think what we're talking about is when the narrative goes out of control and you're struggling to bring it back, saying, well, this has happened because the character made it happen, Do we think that that's fair?
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm just doing this for humorous effect, which is not like me at all. Why you two are laughing. One of the things that I've always said about my writing is that it's my acting background that comes to the fore here, in as much that I have always immersed myself in the characters, and this, as Patrick was saying earlier, is about seeing the story through their eyes, and that's largely how you explore it. But also the thing, and this is, I think, the name of what we're talking about, is your point, Patrick, about the fact that you stop every once in a while and ask yourself, or ask the characters, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why has this happened here? And that's where I tend to then, I'll reach a point where if I get slightly stuck, I like to sort of sit down with all my notes and frame questions, which again is very much an acting tradition of, why has this happened? What's the motive for this? Where is this going? Why has this character done this, or whatever it may be? And I've got to get those questions answered before I can then proceed. Because then it's about refining the understanding of the character in order to know where you're going. And to use my exploration metaphor, I think if you don't do that, which is what we're talking about, you finish up with this very broad perspective of where the story is going. That's so broad, you tend to lose your destination. You have to keep asking yourself those questions to narrow it down, to decide where the destination really is. Otherwise, you finish up saying, I'm going to go to Scotland via Alabama.
Yeah. I sort of liken it to that. I liken it to that feeling you get when you walk into a room and you ask yourself, well, I know I came in here for a reason, but why did I come in here? It's the literary equivalent.
Yeah. In my case, it's dementia, but for other people, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I think it's quite good with your analogy of being an explorer, a sailor. It's when you're going to explore, you know where you're going to go. You're heading in a direction. You don't know what you're going to find, but you are heading in a direction. I think it's kind of what Holly was suggesting is, I guess, kind of going on the ship and having no one on the tiller to direct you at all, and just playing to see which way the wind blows you. Which maybe that'll be a good way of exploring. I don't know. It's a way of thinking more like, but
So far, what we've learned is that writing slumps happen to everybody at all points in the book, and that Patrick should never be put in charge of a ship. That's what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to sail and I never sunk once.
I mean, that is always the hallmark of a good mariner. I don't know enough about ships to continue this line of questioning. So let's jump on to another talking point, because I'd like to get your take on this. And again, I'll let whoever wants to jump in on this first jump in. But when I write, for the first two books, I wrote everything sequentially. I wrote everything in order. For this book, I have jumped around a bit, and that is probably, to my detriment and a mistake that I shouldn't have made, because it made things very confusing. It became very hard to track, and that has been part of the problem that I've experienced with this one. So when you hit a slump, or you hit a wall or a block or whatever you want to call it, are you one of those writers who will push through to the other side, or will you use a placeholder? Will you come back to things? Will you move around? How does it work for you? Phil's shaking his head.
It's linear. I couldn't work any other way. I've got writer friends who will, write particular chapters from different. I mean, we all know, several people that do this, that write chapters from different parts of the book and then, piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I really, really couldn't do that. I've got a very linear brain, and that's how I work. I'm afraid there's no other way possible.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well, in that mine is sequential, but it's mainly because everything that's happened changes what happens next. And for me, I don't see how I could write something out of order and have it make any kind of sense, and unless you're one of these authors who kind of knocks out a draft and then does a lot of revision. Maybe I can see maybe it work that way. But
if you're plotting, I can see how that is possible, because you've got your sequence in place, I suppose. But I just don't know how you do it.
Yeah, I think if you've got a very strong idea of what the narrative's all about, then it is possible to write it on a sort of scene by scene basis in any kind of order. But I think personally, I'd find that a lot more work than it's worth, because as Patrick says, I will always be building on what's come before, and that informs the way I will write what comes later. And for me, it can be very particular, right down to the way people speak in their dialogue, because they will reference the way they've spoken before. So if you don't know how that conversation went exactly, then you can't really write an authentic follow-up. Obviously people can do that way, and it depends on your editing style as well, I guess. But personally, I'd like to have everything, all the information that I can get before I write the bit that needs information. I just find that quite limiting to write it out of order.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where and why I've gone wrong on this, but I think it's been interesting for me as a different way of approaching it, because I have plotted this one in a lot more detail than previous ones, and for the chapters where I've maybe skipped and moved ahead, there's a list of bullet points of these are the things that are going to happen. So I have this general idea, but it definitely does become confusing, and this is why I've had to restart it and kind of go back to the beginning. But I'm interested, Phil, when you were at Phil Parker, just to be clear, because it's very confusing with two of you, when you were saying about you have a linear brain and you have to move forward, how do you manage then when you have those times where you just don't see the next step, that you talked about with those slumps?
Really good question. There are several. Well, there are at least a couple of things. One of them I've mentioned already, which is that, and if I use the book that I'm working on at this present moment, I'm approaching chapter 14, I think it is, and there's roughly going to be about 20 chapters, I think. So I'm getting to that point in the story where I'm building towards the climax, and that's very much where I've got stuck, because the linear part of me doesn't see where it's going. So one of the things that I've done is I've stopped writing completely, and I've gone back to my notes, and I'm now framing the questions of not just what's happening to these characters, but what would be good ideas in order to address this part of the story here. I've realized, for example, that I'm missing 2 or 3 crucial characters that I ought to have introduced much earlier on. And that's come from the questioning process. So I'm going to have to sort of go back and rework a couple of extra chapters in somewhere. So that questioning process, and making the notes of it, and then leaving the notes and then going back to them 2 or 3 days later when it's slightly fresher in my, less fresher in my mind, because I'll see something that I think, oh well, why did I write that? That's wrong. I shouldn't be doing that. And it's making me approach it. And this is the bit that I'm rambling about. It means that I come back at something with objectivity. And the linear part of me needs that objectivity. If that's happening, why is it happening? Stand back and make a decision. The other thing that I sometimes do, and I think I'm going to have to do that with this book, is I start writing short stories about the characters, or I might sort of do letters from one character to another. The kind of thing where it's a case of exploring the characters in more depth, because it means that, given what I was saying before, I don't understand the characters sufficiently clearly, and that's why I've got the problem. I'm using Patrick's metaphor earlier on. The tops of the mountains are over there, but there's so much fog, I can't see anything, and so I'm risking the ship running aground. Back to the sailing metaphor. It's a case of getting the objectivity and writing around the subject in order to get the linear approach.
Well done. No, that's a good and thorough analysis. I personally, I'd add to that. When I tend to find if I hit a slump like that, if I find that I'm at a point where it's difficult to write, it will be generally one of 2 reasons. Will either be that I feel like I've lost enthusiasm, or I don't quite have the motivation, I'm not feeling the story, or there's genuinely a problem there that I feel is not, like, this isn't working for the story. It feels like often they're connected, because if it's something I'm not enthusiastic about, it's probably because it's not got the right thrust to it. It's not driving me on. And in both cases, what I would tend to do that helps me most is, other than going away and thinking about it, making notes, a bit like Phil says, I will just go and, as I said earlier, kind of rehearse things in my mind, kind of think about different ways to do a scene and come back to it. But the main thing I will do is go back and read the earlier stuff. I'll go back and edit a bit as I go. If I reread a few chapters earlier, or as far back in the book as I want to, by the time I get to the point that I'm struggling with, I should be back engaged in the story and should have an idea of how this is going to flow. And if I still don't, if I've hit a scene which I still feel isn't working, back to your point, Holly, I would probably just skip it, and not skip it thinking I'm going to come back and rewrite it. I would just cut that out of the story, whatever it is that is not. If I'm stumbling over, I think this isn't working, I would just cut it out. I'd be like, well, just don't do it. Just move on to the next bit. And I mean, it depends on the problem. It depends what's stalling you. But often, if there's something that you're struggling to write, it might be because it doesn't need to be written.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that you get with experience of writing, is the acceptance of deleting stuff. That if something's not working, the absolute best solution 9 out of 10 is just to delete it. It's not to fiddle with it or fix it in any way. It's just say it's not working. It probably doesn't need to be here. If you can't fix it, it's because it shouldn't be there. And it's amazing what you can cut out, and it doesn't affect the story at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a sign it shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I think there's always the option if, if something's not working, it could be that it's something that could work in something else, or it's something that,
Yeah.
could be a standalone or a short story, as Phil said, so we talk about cutting it out. There's no reason why you can't take that if you like the idea of it and use it somewhere else, put it in a file, put it in a folder, keep it for the future.
Yeah.
And to the
Yeah, I think
reverse of that point,
go on.
Go on,
I
Phil.
was going to say, to the reverse of that point, I find actually quite interesting for my writing a lot of the time when I find something isn't working, and this is often something that works when I'm struggling to get started on a story. If I've got like a whole novel that I think I really want to write this novel, but I just can't get into it. A lot of the time it will be when I combine it with ideas from something else that I've not really got started with, then it clicks. My whole Orchard series kind of started that way. Because I had that whole story written in a different form, and I just realized if I combine it with another story that I've been doing or not finished, then it just suddenly it gave it a whole different kind of momentum.
Yeah. Golden rule is save the files, store them somewhere, because you will come back and you'll use them somewhere in a different story or in a different sort of iteration. I think one other thing I would also add, which is what Patrick's just made me stop to think about. When I wrote that, which was in 2018, I just like you were saying, that took 10 years for me to get to that point. So you think with your 4 years.
I could still get there, Phil.
But in all seriousness, my point is that sometimes when you're writing a story and you hit that slump, it's sometimes about the fact that it's the perspective of the story that is wrong. And that's what I did with that story. I found that I was trying to write that story from the position of two characters who I really felt I'd got a really good understanding and needed to tell the story. I rewrote that story 4 times in that 10 years. And it wasn't until I went on a writing course and my writing tutor said, well, why are they the main characters? And I didn't have an answer. And so it was only when she said that I thought, hang on. I'd read a couple of other books and it suddenly occurred to me, oh God, I know who the main character is. And the main character for that book now is someone who in the previous iterations literally appeared in 1 chapter. He suddenly became the hero or the anti-hero. And I think sometimes it's about the fact that you have to look at your story and decide which angle, which perspective do you need in order to tell the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. And I think what's interesting as well is I think sometimes we get so caught up in, what we think is a good idea, which often is that we actually forget to ask ourselves, the question, is it a good idea? Do I just love this? Am I excited by it? Yes, I am.
Yeah.
But actually, is it right? Is it good? Is it going to work? Because those can be two different things. A lot of the time they're the same.
And does it belong here? It can be a good idea, but for a different story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say one of the things with deleting it, it's true that sometimes it could be used elsewhere, but I think it's always a good idea if you're cutting something big out to save it as a separate file, because it's psychologically easier to delete it if you've got it saved somewhere, because it's easy to become attached to something you spent a lot of time and effort on, and often it does need to be deleted. But if you put it in a file for coming back to later, you never actually have to come back to it later. But it is usefully gone from the story it was causing trouble with. And maybe you will use it later, but I would say 99% of the things I cut like that and put in a file, they stay in the file and they never emerge again.
We've all got a file like that, Patrick.
And I've heard this idea of kind of Zen writing, where you write something and then you just burn it or scrumple it up and throw it away together. And mine is completely the opposite to that. Mine is keep every damn thing, but
I've got every Scrivener file I've got has a folder called offcuts at the bottom, which has got all the bits that I've deleted. I think that's absolutely, like, I think that's really true, that it makes it much easier if you put it in there, because you go, oh, it's not really deleted, I'll use it later, and never look at it again. And some of them are huge. I think I'm trying to remember, one of them I think got about 40,000 words of deleted content from, I think it's from However Many Must Die. So it was almost a third of the length of the book is there deleted. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to me that keeps coming up is this idea of looking back, you know, whether it's looking back at things that you've previously written, whether it's looking back at bits that you've kept that you've maybe cut from things. I actually find one thing that really helps me if I'm in a slump or if I'm struggling to get back into like the motivation that Phil was talking about, is that I'll go and reconnect with the readers that enjoyed the first two books, you know, and I know we don't always like to look at our reviews, but you know, we all have those reviews that we're aware of where someone's really connected with a character or they've really seen what we're trying to do. I think sometimes just to go back and to remind yourself of the reasons why other people enjoy it, as well as why you like writing it, can be very helpful. I do have kind of two talking points I'd like to hit before we wrap this up. So I'd like to kind of jump on to talking a little about the reason why these slumps can happen. So we've talked about, you know, the fact that sometimes the characters can go off piece, whether that's, you know, deliberate or not. We talked about the fact that you can hit writing blocks, but also life can get in the way. As you know, we've mentioned, motivation can drop, energy levels can drop. So do you all find that those things require different approaches to get past?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a lot on the problem, how you're going to handle it. Yes, I mean, I think the biggest problem for me generally is the time issue. If I can get into writing a book, I can write a book very quickly. I'm quite unlikely to lose momentum. It's if I'm interrupted, and if I'm interrupted for a long period of time, it can be quite hard to get back into, and hence I tend to go back to the first few chapters again and again and again, because I'm getting back into the story more than anything. So for me, yeah, I find it difficult if I have a big break from a story. But if I've got like sort of a sustained bit of time, I find it a lot easier to stick with it. And I think a side part of that is having the mental space as well. I think that when I'm writing, I think about my stories a lot. So if I don't have that extra time to think about them as I'm writing, like, you know, if I have to do something else that engages my brain and I can't stop and think about it, then the story's not going to develop the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's a degree of that, but I think also there's sometimes I think a lot of people find themselves in a situation where you don't have that space, and that is a problem. But it becomes about how you manage around things, and for me, what's been most of it is to kind of just lay off myself a bit. You know, it's really easy to beat yourself up if for a month you didn't write anything and you wanted to. But, you know, life comes around, family comes around, you know, someone in the family has a health crisis and you have to deal with it. You know, you can't, if you beat yourself up over that kind of thing, then you're going to find it a lot harder to go back to it. And it's very easy to compare ourselves to certain writers who will do 10 hours a day in their study writing each day, but who don't deal with any family responsibilities or looking after their kids or doing the washing up, whatever it is, you know. And you can't do that. You have to work around your particular situation. If you are caring for, you know, for an ailing relative, and you know, 1 week you get no time, next week you get 2 hours, you use what you've got, and you work around it and say, okay, I didn't do anything that week. You know, next week I got 200 words done. Doesn't matter, I'm now 200 words further towards the end of the book. And yeah, I think for me that was one of the big things, to stop beating myself up over, you know, if something comes along that I can't do it, then I can't do it. And, you know, I haven't failed as a result, because I'll come back to it and I'll finish it another time. I'm not one of these authors who goes back and looks at stuff. I can't go back and look at what I've written until I finish the draft, because I will hate it. I will look at it and think, God, that's in there. That's terrible. Why on earth did I write that? And once I've had a break after the book, I go back to it and think, okay, it was all right, actually. But when I'm actually doing it, I can't do that. And again, you need to understand yourself, I think, psychologically. Are you one of these authors who's going to look back at it and hate it and think it's crap? Or
it's a shame.
Can you assess?
It's a shame, Patrick, because I was going to say a side point of that. You're saying you've got to let yourself do what you can do. I would have added you can also let yourself not care about the quality so much, because I think one of the best ways that you're always going to get over a slump is if you're thinking it doesn't matter how good it is as long as you've written it. I used to, when I worked with startups and stuff, there was a favorite quote that people like to jam about that was "Don't worry, be crappy." And it was just the idea that as long as you get something done, it doesn't matter how good it is. It's just keep moving.
Yeah,
which I can't do, and I think again that's you have to understand yourself psychologically. I can't write something I know to be crap, which is odd when I'm telling you that when I look back at it, I think it's crap. But at the same time, when I'm writing it, I have to think it's good.
Yeah,
which is probably why I don't look back. It's
we are all contradictions as writers. This is what we are in our souls.
I think there's one other thing as well that I would add to that, and that is that for me, it is a major reason why I really enjoy being an indie author, because I don't have agents and publishers banging on my door demanding work to be finished by deadlines. I spent a career, sort of working in education where every single hour was accounted for, and to end that was like a freedom. Now,
and if you're traditionally, go on, Phil.
Now I enjoy the fact that I write when I want to, but there is always, as several authors have said to me quite recently, there is always that urge that means that you have to write at some point when, as we've just been saying, when mentally you're in that position to write. When you can't write, don't, because you're just not mentally ready to do that. You have to choose the right point to do that, and you have to be, I think, aware, self-aware, to know when that is.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we're basically saying is that if the slump is as a result of the writing not working, then push through, keep going, work on it, do what you need to do to get through it. If the slump is because of life or work or family, give yourself a break and just let it happen when it happens.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's sound advice. I'd like to sort of wrap up just by giving a few kind of, quick tips, handy hints, cheats, whatever you want to call them. What are some of the things that you do personally to just make sure that if you feel those slumps approaching, we've talked about the idea of asking questions, we've talked about the idea of cutting things out. Is there anything else that people could maybe take away that you do, even if it's a particular brand of coffee that you find perks up the old brain cells?
Or wine.
Or wine.
I would say that you kind of, again, you need to know yourself. If, for instance, you have ADHD, like I do, then you'll find that a routine is not actually always very helpful, and what you need is change. So I'm not one of these people who can write forever in the same spot. So I might write one place for a week, and then I'll need to find some other situation with a bit, different place, different type of music, whatever, different to get me going again. And you have to bring in the kind of the stimulation to get you going. And I think that's perhaps why middles can be difficult, because it is doing the same thing over and over again. And for me, one of the things that I would add, like I should have said earlier though, is that if you're feeling a slump, it can often be because your book is actually having its own slump. And I think when you're a newer writer, particularly, you kind of have you tend to have middles, and I'm not a fan of having middles in books. If you're writing something that is the middle, then I think you're doing something wrong. I think everything needs its own kind of arc, its own story. You need kind of nested arcs, you need interlocking arcs. So everything you're writing should have a bit of story developing within it. And I think you can slump when you're writing something that is a middle, rather than a story by itself. It's like you've got your beginning of the story, you know what the end is, and you've got this stuff in the middle that doesn't have its own reason for being there. And I think that can lead to you kind of losing momentum and starting to slump in there.
I think it's a really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point. For me, I think it's rather like a staircase that you are constantly moving up, aren't you, until you get to the climactic part at the top of the staircase, where the nightmares happen. That's
when you fall back down.
That's just my house. For me, one of the things that I find that helps enormously when I get slumped, I tend to write all my stories based on British folklore in some respect or another, and I tend to read, I should say, a load of stuff when I get stuck that is about British folklore in general, mythology in the broadest sense. We went to see Odysseus last week, and it was a case of that throughout the whole sort of film, my wife was elbowing me, shut up, as I was saying, oh, that's because of something said. Because it's a case of that so much mythology has always fascinated me. So the more informed I get, the more I find that will stimulate ideas, not necessarily at this moment, but making the notes is something that I can go back to 6 months down the line and think, I need something to do this, and I know, and there it is. And so it's investment, I would say.
Yeah. I would agree in that read non-fiction as well as fiction.
Yeah.
Fiction is great to read,
sure.
and you need to read it as a fiction writer. But if you read non-fiction, if you read biographies, if you read histories, if you read folklore, you'll suddenly start to come up with ideas you can put into your story.
Yeah.
And again, that's something you would be then thinking, ooh, this could happen, and then you suddenly don't have a slump on that bit. You're excited to do that bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would take it to as just a more general point in my mind was just remember what inspires you, and just fall back on that. Always keep in mind what's inspiring to you, and if you're feeling like you're having a slump, then find that inspiration again. Go, take a break from the book, but if something made you want to write that story, remember what it was. Or find something new that gives you the passion. And it could be anything. I mean, personally, I find I get very inspired to write by music a lot, and it's often music that has nothing to do with what I'm writing. It's just when I can hear a certain piece of music, I will picture a certain kind of scene, and it will draw me into a story that's completely unrelated to the music, but it's just art can inspire other art in completely different ways. But I think it's important to always have something like that will keep you going. And it could be, as I said, go back and reread what you're writing, or if Patrick don't at all, but it's at least think about where you want to go there. As I said at the beginning, I tend to write towards a scene. Like I want to get somewhere in my story. So if I'm slumping, maybe I don't have that. Maybe I haven't thought of that, or it's not inspiring me the way it should be. So it's always for me a case of maybe take a break and just find that inspiration again to make you feel enthusiasm, because I think a lot of the time that's what's lacking. And I think what Patrick is saying there is an excellent point, that when you're getting to middles, if you're finding there's a plateau, it will be because you're writing something that you're not enthusiastic about, and there will be a reason for that. And I think that the idea that you said before, we do this in editing, and I was going to say for Phil's staircase analogy, which is just the same point, would be that we always tend to write with rising action, and it should be rising action. If you're writing a middle and it feels flat, then the action's not rising. So what's the point? Why are you writing that? Why are you writing something that doesn't feel like it's interesting? It should always be doing something. And to Patrick's point, you can very easily think about different parts of the story in different peaks and troughs. Like if you find a chapter's flat, then don't think about it as this is a flat chapter. Think this chapter needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. what's happening in this chapter and what's the climax of this chapter. And if you think about a chapter like that, you'll realize actually that you need to tell a story within that chapter. And if it's flat, then you're probably not telling a story. It means either you come up with one or you delete the chapter.
Yeah.
No, I think there's a lot to take away there. I'm very aware that as of right now, I have about 10 minutes before my laptop battery runs out because I did not plug it in because I've run out of plugs in this room. So I want to make sure that you all get a chance to talk about your own work and your books before we wrap up for this session, so that people can go out and buy them all. So we'll do a quick round of kind of where people can find you, what works you've got available, and then we'll sort of bring this to a conclusion. So Patrick, what have you got available and where can people find it?
Right, you can find all my stuff at patricksamphire.com. I've got a variety of things available. The most recent complete series that I had was Men of Thorn series, which started with Shadow of a Dead God. It's now finished after 4 full-length novels, a novella and a short story. And you can buy all of those basically anywhere, but you can find them via my website. I've got a short series for children, which starts with Secrets of the Dragon Tomb, which is set on Mars, and it's a lot of fun to write. The current one I'm writing a historical one that I've been writing forever, but I have finished the second draft of it finally. So that will be my next book to come out. It's called Brittle Things, but that will be a little while before it's out.
Brilliant. And Mr. Parker.
So you'll find all my books on Amazon, and if you sort of write in sort of Phil Parker fantasy, you'll find all of my sort of 8 books there. There is that one which is the start of my British Bureau for the Arcane series, and there's lots of others that are all there, and as I say, all connected to British folklore and Portal fantasy and broken characters, basically.
Very nice. Phil Williams.
You'll find, I think most of my stuff on my website at phil-williams.co.uk, and my books are in all major stores. I've got a whole range of them. The most recent series is the epic military fantasy, The Blood Scouts, which starts with However Many Must Die. There's 4 books, 3 books and a novella in that one at the moment. And I've got the Aldshore series, which is it's 7 books now, but that's got a bunch of standalones. That's contemporary fantasy with quite dark undertones, I guess. And I've got a couple of dystopian books out, and I've got a new dystopian series starting, which will be next week, coming out with The Worst Survive, which is a kind of near future post-apocalyptic dystopian action adventure, which is it's quite coarse, a lot of fun, and a bit of a departure.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And I believe that we have a review coming out on Spotlight Indie for that at some point in the next few weeks. So people can keep an eye out for that as well. My books are available if people want to check out books 1 and 2 of the Vanguard Chronicles as we chronicle the journey towards book 3. I will continue to update throughout the rest of this month towards the end of August, where I will be completing this manuscript. But until then, please do check in with Spotlight Indie on all of our socials, and you can also come along and join our Patreon to get lots of extra content. I would like to thank Patrick, Phil and Phil for joining me and dispensing their wisdom throughout this conversation. But I think the most important thing for me that I've taken away from this is, in the words of Phil Williams, don't worry, be crappy. So until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.